Welcome to another True Disciples broadcast. We're so glad that you tuned in this day to be with us, and it is our great hope to inspire you, to educate you, to challenge you, and hopefully to activate you into your Christian faith so you can take it into whatever arena God has placed you in. And for these next 30 minutes, we're going to be exploring a topic that hopefully will resource you to better able you to do exactly that. My name is Dr. Kevin Baird. I am the lead pastor of Legacy Church here in Charleston, South Carolina. I've been a pastor for nearly 30 years, as well as a college professor, academic dean. I've been blessed to go to conferences on occasion and speak there. I'm a husband, a father, and an overall nice guy, and I'm glad you tuned in today. I also mentioned that I'm the executive director of the South Carolina Pastors Alliance. It is a network of pastors uniting here in South Carolina, linking up for the causes of faith, family, and freedom. So welcome today to the True Disciples broadcast, and we're so glad you tuned in. We have a special guest with us that we'll be introducing to you in just a moment. We started last week talking about leadership, and we have one who has spent a great deal of time studying the area of leadership. I'm going to introduce him to you just momentarily, but before we do, I want to remind you again, please contact us. I am so encouraged to find that there are people who are wanting to help underwrite and financially support this radio program. A number of individuals are doing that. We appreciate them so very much. I might also just suggest those of you who are business people, both men and women, and you are Christians and you consider your business to be an extension of your Christian faith and values, you may want to consider supporting a program such as this, because we're living in challenging days. We have recently court cases where photographers, Christian photographers and Christian bakers are being challenged as to whether or not they can participate or should be forced to participate in areas that may violate their Christian conscience. And so same-sex advocates are endeavoring to take these people to court, and they're wanting to force Christian business people to participate in things that violate their religious beliefs. And so what we're trying to do is to resource people, encourage people, let you know that you are not alone out there, that there are people who will stand with you and support you, and we're going to have to navigate some bumpy days here in America. So we would love to hear from you, and I'm glad you're tuned in today. And if you know someone like that, you may want to mention this radio station and have them tuned in, and we'll do all that we can to keep you encouraged. Hey, you can contact us by email through legacychurchsc@aol.com. Again, legacychurchsc, like South Carolina, at aol.com, or at scpastorsalliance@aol.com as well. And you can catch up on our website by going to Legacy Church. You can Google these things, or the South Carolina Pastors Alliance. We're on Legacy Media through YouTube. I mean, you should be able to find us easily and quickly. And again, we're glad you're with us today. Well, we've been talking with Doug Dickerson. Doug is a leadership consultant and motivational speaker. He's the director of the Management Moment Leadership Services. I've known Doug now for a number of years. Our daughters are good friends, and I know that he has a great knowledge and expertise in the area of leadership. As he mentioned last time, maybe no one can be exactly an expert, but I know that he's studied a lot more than I have, and so I wanted him to visit with us, talk a little bit about what it means to be a Christian leader. And at the end of this broadcast, he's going to tell you some points that you can contact him with regards to his ministry and services. But he does this and talks with both businesses and churches in the area of leadership. And Doug, welcome back to our second broadcast. I'm so glad you're with me here on the True Disciples broadcast.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much. It's a delight, honor to be with you, and I certainly enjoyed being with you in this program, and enjoy your ministry, enjoy your friendship, and appreciate the leadership that you bring to not just the Charleston community, but the greater community across the country with your insights and wisdom and the way in which God is working in your life.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And now that we've scratched each other's backs, now we've done that appropriately. Right. We can dive into leadership. Hey, remind us again. How do you define leadership? Remind us.
Well, I define leadership as influence. I love that definition by John Maxwell. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And I think that is such an appropriate way of defining it, because it transcends not just your role and your job in the marketplace, but whatever. But it also, I think, identifies in a lot of respects your leadership style in terms of ministry in the church and the body of Christ. It's influence and using that influence for the glory of God.
I like that definition as well, because if leadership is influence, that means anyone can be a leader.
Anyone can be a leader. Absolutely.
Because we're all influencing someone.
Right. And you take the totality of the body of Christ out in the marketplace in the world. I mean, they are in places. You have people in your church in places where you can't go. You have people touching lives in ways that you would never be able to, except in that corporate setting once a week on Sunday. But they're in places where, they can have impact day in and day out. And that's the beauty of it. If you're just willing to be used by God and use your gifts and talents and abilities for His glory, and with that thought in mind, it's not even something that consciously you are aware of as far as you are performing as a leader. It's just something that you're doing as a believer. And as a believer, you are exerting influence. And when you are doing that, you are leading.
Yes. I want to make sure that we jump on this topic, because recently there's been quite an uproar. I've been watching through Twitter and other social media venues, as well as just the news, with regards to the VMAs and Miley Cyrus and her performance on stage, and how many, interestingly enough, even what we would define as in the world or have no basis of Christian value system, were somewhat concerned and upset over that particular performance. Reason being was that for years she had influence over a group of kids, and now as she's growing up, and I guess we can discuss whether or not this is truly growing up or not, but anyway, as she's coming into her adulthood, she seems to be turning from some of the virtuous themes that she had to now some more overtly sexual themes. But it brings to me this whole concept of influence, and how our influence really is a sacred trust.
Well, it is a sacred trust. And here's the caveat to that, because I think, we throw the definition out there, but I think it's worth bringing up this point of clarity, because influence, if you're doing it right, can be a tool for good, tool used by God, but yet also you can look down through the course of history of leaders who were influential, but they were influential in horrible ways. All right. So you can take an example of Hitler, for example. Was Hitler a leader? Well, yeah, unfortunately, yes, he was, but for all the wrong reasons. So, it's important to understand that, at least from a Christian perspective, our responsibility is to be salt and light and live a holy life and do the things that God has called us to do. That being said, we're all products of grace, and I look at my own life. I look at, mistakes that I've made and things that I've done that I can look back and say, that just really wasn't my proudest moment. But that being said, the grace of God, is what keeps us going. So we go back to the Miley Cyrus story, and we go back to that. VMA obviously is meant to bring shock value. Historically, you look at some of the performers in the past who have done things, and you talk about kind of straying off the course of perhaps the values and the ways in which she was brought up that we are aware of. So it brings back to me the scripture from Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, where it says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." And so, as leaders, that is so critically important, because you look at leaders that have fallen, mistakes they've made, things that they've done, we're tracing back. Okay. So guard your heart. That is so critically important, especially for Christian leaders today, to guard your heart, for it determines the course of your life. And so you want to trace where they went wrong, or the mistakes that they made, or how did they end up like this, and what went wrong? So many times we're trying to, find all these different things that went wrong, and perhaps there are many things that you could point to depending upon that situation. But guard your heart above all else, he says, because it determines the course of your life. And so those choices, those decisions that we make, it's going back to what we talked about on the last program of, keeping God first in your life, and, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Guard your heart above all else. It determines the course of your life. And the course of your life as a leader is determined by your relationship to God.
I want to keep going and exploring this because I think it's really important, and we won't pick on Miley Cyrus alone, because there are plenty of examples out there across the board in all sorts of areas. But let's talk about character for just a moment in leadership. I mean, I'm watching high-priced, paid athletes and celebrities who wield incredible influence. I mean, they are paid not just for their abilities and skills on an athletic field or on a movie screen, but they're endorsing products and doing advertising. And the reason they're hired is because the manufacturer knows they have influence. I mean, I want this ball player to sell these shoes because he influences people, and they'll go buy shoes if he's associated with it. So obviously they have influence and they're leaders. And yet at the same time, I've heard them say as they're interviewed, I don't want to be a role model. I don't want to be put up on a pedestal. I want to live my life the way I want to live it. Don't look to me. And it seems at best hypocritical or duplicitous for them to be able to want to wield influence to make millions and millions of dollars for themselves or someone else, and yet at the same time not feel a responsibility to people whom they are influencing to lead them in appropriate directions. Let's talk about character.
Well, I obviously at the end of the day, character matters. It's important. I think the big distinction that you see being played out, whether it's a sports athlete or someone in the church, for example, what you see taking place in the arena of the marketplace, sports, endorsements, that kind of stuff, really what you're looking at is, from a secular point of view, is what's good for business, the bottom line, how is that endorsement going to return financial gain for that company, whatever. And so I think a lot of times they get a pass. At least in terms of, by and large, they get a pass. Not exclusively celebrities getting a pass for their behavior in terms of product endorsement. But I think clearly, as you mentioned, there is a hypocrisy that exists. And I think perhaps the enforcement of that might be selective at times. I think certainly you can go back and point out, look at the case involving Paula Dean as an example of that. That case was eventually dropped, and the lawsuit was dropped. But you can look at examples of that from a secular point of view, and also on the church side. But character is so important, and why would you be endorsing a product you don't support or believe in? Why would you have somebody that you've brought on for endorsements, for example, that does not necessarily reflect the kind of values that you would subscribe to or want to promote? Because if your money is tied to it, you are promoting it. At least indirectly, you are promoting it. So I think you have to be careful in that regard. So, and as for opting not to want to be held up as role models, well, that is wanting your cake, have your cake and eat it too. You want the fame and the notoriety that comes with being a celebrity or sports figure or whatever the case may be, but yet you want to somehow divorce yourself from the accountability that's necessary. You just can't have it that way. And that's where I think the importance of leadership is so pertinent, because as a leader, you take responsibility. Character matters. You step up, you take responsibility. And again, I go back to what we mentioned earlier. We all of us are the product of grace, and but for the grace of God, there go I. And I know in my life I've had times where I've really needed extra grace of God in my life because of things that I've done that, that was kind of boneheaded. I shouldn't have done that, or shouldn't have spoken this way to this person, or whatever the case may be. But, I think it comes back to that secular view of leadership versus the biblical view of leadership, because you look at the life of David. David is one of the great examples of somebody that was a great leader, certainly had his share of failings, things that, he did that were clearly wrong and sinful, but yet also the Bible records him as one who was a man after God's own heart. And I think that speaks volumes to us today. And it's a source of, I think, of number one, of warning, but yet also number two, of hope that's out there for all of us.
Excellent. We're talking with Doug Dickerson here on the True Disciples broadcast. Doug is a leadership consultant, motivational speaker, author, director of management, Moment Leadership Services, and we are indeed talking about leadership and maintaining our influence. I found, Doug, I have now lived in this area, the Charleston area, for, I'm counting them up in my mind now, like 16 years. And I have found that longevity gives you some level of authority and leadership. Mm-hmm. Just being there and being steady, being consistent. Having known that, I also know that you can spend years building up your leadership, and in a few moments, it can all come crumbling down around you. Why is it? And it doesn't matter whether it's a politician who does dumb things. It can be a minister who does dumb things, a celebrity, a media sportscaster. I can think of a couple media news people who found themselves in difficult situations. Can you identify maybe, and you already mentioned every situation can be different, but is there a pitfall, or is there a crack in their armor somewhere that seems to be consistent across the board that causes these people with great influence to derail? And help us to identify that, because whatever level of influence we're at, the last thing we want is to be derailed.
Right. Well, I think from a biblical viewpoint, I think you can look at what happens when you allow pride to enter into your life. Philippians 2:3, it says, "Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself." So I think when we get to that place where, we set ourselves up, or we're buying our own headlines, or we are allowing any notoriety or fame to go to our head, then we are setting ourselves up for potentially a foothold to come in that could possibly derail us. So I think key to it is to realize that I serve at the pleasure of the King. Okay, I serve at the pleasure of God, who has placed me in this position or responsibility or whatever it is that I'm doing, and so it's up to me to walk humbly before God, to realize the source of my authority, and to understand that it is important that I live a life that I'm walking in humility. I have service first and foremost in my mind. Now let's parallel that to what happens a lot of times in the secular area. And I have just three great thoughts here. This is from Alan Weber, who wrote in his book, Rules of Thumb. And one of the things he talked about was the border guards. Okay. It's corporate America, you get surrounded, and a lot of this bleeds over into the Christian arena and circles, but he was talking about the border guards, and the border guards are those that have a way to insulate you and protect you from others, outside influences, or other people that are trying to get to you. And basically, they are the ones that stand guard at your door to keep everybody out and keep everybody away. And here's the danger in that. Number one, you have people who tend to not hold themselves accountable to others. There's no accountability in place. And I think that is one of the reasons why it leads to leaders falling, and you see the things that are taking place. So his suggestions was threefold. One, keep people around you who aren't afraid to speak truth to power. And so we see that in corporate America. You see that with the big banks, all the things that have, that fell, and you see this with politicians. So the tendency is not to speak truth to power, but to insulate power, to appease power, trying to curry favor with power. And we're not doing that person a justice, and we're not certainly, doing what we should be doing when we subscribe to that thinking. And secondly, his thought was to remember to rub shoulders with real people. And I think that is something you can trace back to, be it people in the business world or ministries and churches and pastors who, the early days, they understood the struggle. They knew what it meant to rub shoulders with people and share the load and work together and do the things that, built that particular ministry, whatever it might be. But yet along the way, the fame, the people, the power, the money, further removed and isolated them from others around them. And third suggestion was simply don't ignore the emotional side of business. And so, I think that when you look at that from a secular standpoint, but incorporate that into the church world, how important it is not to forget your roots, not to forget where God brought you from. You are where you are because of God, and that is so important. So these are things I think that are just critical to your success as a leader, not to allow pride to enter in, not to have that haughty spirit, but be humble, be a servant. You are here to serve others.
That's excellent, because we want to retain and maintain our leadership influence for kingdom purposes and causes. As I was listening to you and I was thinking through, the challenges that leaders are faced with, and there are numerous challenges that all of us go through, I have just recently, and this is just something we can just banter a little bit about, I've just recently been convinced in greater measure that perhaps the one attribute of leadership that is important is just courage. Mm-hmm. I think if there's anything that distinguishes a leader from just the crowd, is the capacity to be courageous. And I think people aren't going to follow titles. They aren't going to follow just moral people. I mean, we want moral leaders, but there's something that people respond to when they see courage, and courage manifests in different ways at different times for different purposes. But I'm just finding that people don't show up for titles; they show up for courage, right? And that's what it seems to me we're needing in the day we're living in.
Well, I totally agree with that. And I think of the story of David when he was facing the giant, and when he talked about going out to face him when he killed Goliath, was that he ran to the battle. And I think so oftentimes we run to a certain point, but then we back off and we quit. And so we kind of deflect it and defer it to somebody else who, is willing to step up and take on the giants that we face in our society and culture today. So I think courage is so essential to leadership. And I think that what's needed are those who will step up and say, Lord, here am I, use me, and take that approach of with God, all things are possible. And that being true, how can I be used to God to impact my society, my culture? I love this quote. I wrote it down because I wanted to make sure I got it in, but it's from Mark Batterson. He said, God isn't offended by your biggest dreams or boldest prayers. He is offended by anything less. And I think that is such a great quote, but yet also I think it ties back into praying courageous prayers, doing courageous things for God, and saying, God, here am I, use me. And, I don't have to have a title. I don't have to have this or that. God is looking for our availability, and not just our ability, but our availability to be used by him. And if God can use a person like David, God can use me. God can use you. Yes. If God can use, some of the other characters in the Bible that we read and we study and we learn about, God can use any of us. But yet, God hasn't given us, the scripture says, the spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. And so I think as we arm ourselves with this whole idea that, God is for me, who can be against me? And we can pray courageous prayers. We can dream big dreams, and we can do it with spirit-empowered courage. That makes all the difference.
For me, and as I exercise leadership in the areas that I've been entrusted and a steward over, there are those moments that we build consensus and understanding, And that's necessary. But then there are moments, there's almost this radical notion that whether anybody's with me or not,
Yes.
this is a courageous moment.
Sure.
And I think probably a part of that leadership equation is the wisdom to know the difference between the two.
Right. And sometimes that leadership, it means having the courage to stand alone at times. And so, Maxwell said it's lonely at the top, so you better know why you're there. So leadership can be a lonely place at times, but when God is on your side and God gives you the courage, all things are possible.
Amen. Well, I believe God's raising up a lot of courageous people in this hour. It's an important hour in so many ways. And Doug, thank you so much for being with us here on the True Disciples broadcast. Is there a way that people can get in contact with you if they would like for you to resource them, get a book, hear more about this, maybe schedule you for speaking?
Sure. And thank you again for the opportunity to be back on the program with you. It was such a pleasure and honor to be with you today. They can access my website, www.dougsmanagementmoment.blogspot.com, or they can simply email me at managementmoment@gmail.com.
And they can get all the information they need with regards to leadership information or your resources.
All of it's there. My weekly columns, resources, books, speaking, everything is there.
Well, I appreciate you coming in and being with me these last couple of weeks, Doug. I appreciate it very much and wish you well in those endeavors. And I'm so glad that you tuned in today as a listener to the True Disciples broadcast. I just want to remind you, we're always looking for sponsors to help us keep this program going forward. We'd love to be able to expand into other markets, all through not only my home state, but in other states as well. And so you can do that by contacting us at any of our contact points, which you can find through our websites at legacychurchsc.org or go to the scpastorsalliance.net. And through either of those media venues, you can contact us and we can get you any information you might want to have. I want to keep mentioning to you and keep promoting before you that we're having a great conference, a summit. The South Carolina Pastors Alliance is sponsoring it on October the 17th. That's a Thursday morning in Columbia, South Carolina, right in the middle of our state. So everyone can travel in from every direction, and it's not a hardship on anybody. But to come on in, it's going to start promptly at 10 a.m., October the 17th, Thursday, and it's a summit for pastors and Christian leaders. We're going to be giving you some briefings, hopefully inspire you with regards to stepping into the arena of public policy debate and discussion. We're going to give you some points of activation that you can take with you. And no matter where you are on the spectrum of courage, whether you're at the tip of the spear or whether you just want to be a voice that cheerleads those that are called to that area, we've got something that everyone can take away and you can participate in. That will be held at the Columbia World Outreach. That's a local church, a great local church in Columbia. Columbia World Outreach, 523 Superior Street there in Columbia, South Carolina. It's not but a baseball throw, or a football throw, I guess I should say, from Williams-Brice Stadium. So if you can find that stadium, you can find this local church. Our host pastor will be Pastor Mike Gonzalez, a great brother in the Lord. Well, again, thank you for listening to us today. We want you to be encouraged in your walk, so keep walking the walk and stay consistent in your leadership and being salt and light in the arena that God has led you into. I can assure you, you are making a difference, and we want you to keep being a true disciple. This is Pastor Kevin Baird of Legacy Church wishing you a great week. God bless you. See you next time.